Praising God for, God willing, a chance to accurately talk about another part of his word. Let's call the book of Ezekiel. Did I say we're praising God because we get to start another book of the Bible? If I didn't, let's praise him because we get to start a brand new book of the word, another one of the major prophets, Ezekiel, by titling it Too Much. Or really, let's call it I Saw and subtitle it Too Much. Understanding that what Ezekiel sees doesn't seem to be too much for him, even though he does seem to fall down in awe at seeing visions of God. But it's really too much for me to describe because much like the revelation, it is given to Ezekiel in visions that he is trying to render into words that are too much for me to explain. And so the temptation is to multiply words in situations where our understanding might be lacking. And so I'm going to try to avoid the temptation to say too much about a chapter that is really too much for me to explain by just getting into it and letting you know that the first 3 verses or so are helping us set context by saying that he, Ezekiel, was among the exiles by the Kibar Canal. That's in Babylon, where he saw visions of God. In the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin, Ezekiel, the priest, is the one who is going to talk to us about what he saw starting in chapter 1. I'm going to try to circle back to all of that context as I simply set up the organization for what he saw. Because I don't understand much of it, I'm just going to give you the organization as it unfolds in verses 4 through 14 as a stormy wind, which included a great cloud. And from that great cloud, he's going to describe 4 living creatures. Next, in the 15th verse through roughly the 21st verse, he's going to talk about a wheel within a wheel that seems to be next to each living creature that might actually or seems to house the spirit of those living creatures. Going on, however, in verses 22 through 25, he's going to talk about an expanse that seems to exist above the heads of the 4 living creatures. And out of that expanse, he's going to say that there is a voice that came in verse 25. But verses 26 on through 28 are going to seem to describe who is attributed to that voice, that being the image of God. As distinguished from seeing God himself, he says he sees the vision or visions of God. Isaiah, however, in chapter 6 of the book of Isaiah, seems to say that he literally saw God. Either way, they both seem to be in awe at what they saw. Ezekiel concluding this chapter by saying in verse, I think it's 29, maybe it's just more verse 28, saying, such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. And when I saw it, I fell on my face and I heard the voice of one speaking, as he'll go into chapter 2 to describe the beginning of what God told him, what my Bible, the ESV, will call Ezekiel's call, similar to Isaiah's call and Jeremiah's call. We'll see here how it all began for Ezekiel. However, going back to the context, looking at some of the similarities and maybe differences between Ezekiel's call, Jeremiah's call, and Isaiah's call, understanding that Ezekiel is called from the Kibar Canal or by the Kibar Canal in Babylon, what we are getting to see is quite possibly another perspective on the false prophecy that began to pop up even amongst the exiles. Remembering that there was a chapter devoted to a parallel or a parable, I guess, of good figs and bad figs. Not to mistake the early exiles under Jehoiachin as the bad figs. They were actually described as the good figs, the ones that God was moving away from the destruction that was coming to Judah and Jerusalem. However, amongst the remnant, a new crop of false prophets began to emerge, telling the people really what they still wanted to hear. And that is, even though you've already been carted off to Babylon, you won't be here long because you'll be back in Judah before you know it. Quite possibly leaving Ezekiel throughout the rest of this book with the unenviable task of speaking to people who have already had it difficult and telling them the truth in a situation when they simply want to hear, it's just going to get better from here. The truth is, it's not. And one of the reasons, even though I don't understand the visions of this chapter, but one of the reasons God might have given him such powerful visions is that the same pressure to want to hear that the road back from exile where they had gotten themselves was just going to be a lot easier than what it actually would be. That pressure might have been just as great on Ezekiel too, if God had not given him such a powerful vision. And in the next chapter, the warning not to be like those who are simply looking for an easier path, no matter how unrealistic that path might be. Understanding that in life, even when we are listening to nonsense, if you put us under enough pressure, nonsense can start to seem to make good sense when we simply want some relief from life's pressures. However, those are typically the times when we need to avoid the temptation of, as we've heard before, making a bad situation worse. Something that God is going to warn the exiles through Ezekiel, as we'll see throughout the rest of this book, at great personal cost to Ezekiel.